Welcome to Air Quality Matters, and this is a conversation with Tom Robbins, the CEO of Switchee. Founded in 2015 by Adam Fudakowski and Ian Napier, they believed that internet-connected technology could be applied to help social landlords better manage their stock and reduce fuel bills for residents. The solution was a smart thermostat designed specifically for landlords, with a dashboard providing real-time data and insights, including some environmental conditions within the home. Following Ian's death in tragic circumstances in 2019, Adam and the team resolved to continue growing the business in his memory. And in 2020, Tom came into the business and a year later promoted to CEO. Under Tom's stewardship, the business has continued to grow. Tom has spent his career in scale-up leadership roles, manufacturing consulting with Newton, financial services analytics with BIPB, a board decision platform with Board Intelligence, and telecommunications with Community Fibre. Tom has been working in the housing sector since 2015 and believes in the power of technology to improve the quality of life for residents, while transforming the operating model for providers. Tom is a real people-focused leader with a track record in building and motivating teams, but also a technical background with a master's in chemical engineering from the University of Cambridge. I've been following Switchee's journey from its early days and have been fascinated by the passion of its people and its mission-led approach to data from the built environment. I was intrigued to chat to Tom about Switchee's lived experience of translating data in a meaningful way and that genuinely tries to answer important questions in the sector and how that potential can be unlocked. As more and more of the spaces we occupy provide meaningful data about the environment around us, the lessons companies like Switchee are learning could be a valuable insight for others. And importantly, Tom is able to paint a picture of what scale up in this space looks like and the potential it holds. Thanks for listening as always. This is a conversation with Tom Robbins. What do we really mean when we talk about actionable insights fundamentally? Because it's something that's often spoken and I think very difficult to realize. And it really moves to this: how do we translate actionable insight into success for customers? And I think Switch has been in a really unique position in that sector to probably understand that more deeply than many others.
Yeah, I think for a long time we thought an actionable insight was a piece of data that you could do something about, right? There was a real focus and that meant that we wanted to give people as many pieces of data as we possibly could, in the assumption that they would then take that data and do something about it. We've taken a bit of a step back and we've been a bit of a journey and really understanding that an actionable insight is not just about the piece of data. It's about so much more. It's about the whole journey that then follows. It's about the ability of that person to understand it and interpret that data. Maybe they've not got a data background, it's the way they engage with it. Then you're looking at the resources within their organization then to be what that then can be applied. Then you're looking at the priorities that sit within those resources. And then at the end of it, you're looking about whether they actually understand whether that resource that's been applied has made a difference and has actually delivered something, So when we talk about actionable insights, for a long time, I think we've been too data orientated and thinking much more around the broader process. That's the capability of the organization, the driver from regulation, the relationship with the tenant. All of those fit in whether it's so much more about the actionable than it is about the insight.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And it's that kind of not another dashboard syndrome of organizations where there's huge potential for data, but it's how you practically realize that as an organization trying to leverage it, isn't it?
I just really simply, would you like some more problems? Because I've got I've got some real time problems here for you, right? And for an organisational level, no, probably I wouldn't. Now, do you want to improve the outcomes for residents, for tenants? Hell yes, we absolutely would. But would we like some more problems? No, thank you. And how do we turn data so it's not a problem, but is an enabler? And I really believe with time is the enabler in enabling that kind of that resident led process. But there's quite a hump, right? When the housing sector has always operated on quite a lag of data. In some cases, no data whatsoever. We look back to the heyday of the large proportion of UK housing that was social housing. The ratio of humans to homes in delivery of the service was quite high. People were going across the threshold pretty regularly. Your data collection was those regular touch points, those relationships, those communities that sat around it. Over time, and salami slicing and changes of government and funding, etc., the ratio between the people that are going into the properties and the number of properties has changed 10x, probably more, 20x over that time period. You've also separated the people that are going over over the threshold, maybe isn't employed by the same organisation that provides the property, and that kind of separation between those points means we got very used to having very poor data. We take it for granted we've got very poor data, and so we make assumptions and we make generalizations, and worst of all, we just respond to complaints. And we've become a whole sort of industry that just gets very good at responding to complaints. Well, actually, I think the Ombudsman may think slightly differently, but we just are focused around responding to complaints. And data changes all of that. Data enables us to move from reactive to proactive, but there's such a hump. There's such a hump between those 2 points of just on one hand only knowing about who shouts the loudest to knowing how big the actual problem is. They're quite fundamentally different. Our data again would suggest it's probably 10x would be a good rule of thumb. If it's only 1 in 10 of the things that you're aware of is actually what's going on out there, and crossing that hump is not something that you can do as a oneer, right? It's not something we can do next week. So actually understanding it and making it into bite-sized chunks and making it achievable is something that we're working really hard with our clients and customers to do.
To speak of overused words, the only thing that probably tops actionable insights in the data world is moving from reactive to proactive. So we must come back to that later, because that's a it's easy spoken, hard to deliver.
Absolutely, and I'm more than happy to be called on the bingo on that. But I think ultimately it's necessary, right? You can't keep salami slicing a reactive model. You just get to a point where you are completely out of touch with actually what's going on, and I don't think we're that far off that place at the moment.
I mean, you speak of dramatic change within housing, which there clearly has been, but I don't get a sense that pace of change is going to change anytime soon. That it's a sector that's continuing to evolve and change at pace.
I don't think the expectations that have come in are going to change particularly. We're seeing a change, quite a material change in the demographic of people in housing. We're seeing quite a change in those expectations. I was with a housing provider yesterday that's 18-19% Gen Z, and are seeing a completely different way that the properties are being used. Even in the last sort of 5 years or so, in terms of those expectations. So this change is going to keep coming without a doubt. I would argue to a point it was long overdue, but yeah, housing is going to be squeezed. We need to build more, and we need to deliver housing to a high quality standard.
Well, one of the challenges of that change has been the constant cycling of personnel and the type of organisations that are evolved in housing, and perhaps one of the things that data offers up is a consistency that you may not have got in the older models, where that knowledge was inherent to individuals in the organisation that knew estates or householders or supply chains in the area. Now that that data can hold a level of consistency that wasn't available before, I guess.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. Actually, it's relevant. I was with a leadership team of a pretty decent size housing association last week. They, because of the particular demographic that they serve, have got a much higher ratio of people to properties. And one of the things that they found was an area they were looking to build on was when you've got that number of people, then the consistency of estimation becomes quite difficult. You've got the sort of the opinions come into one person's perception of warm, one person's perception of stuffy, moldy. You bring that kind of perception piece. That itself can be quite difficult to manage because it gets quite emotive. It's trying to tell one person what warm is and another person what warm is. I'm a professional. I know what warm is, and the data can be really powerful in just giving a consistent experience. I know we're going to jump onto it later, but I'm very skeptical of our data. It makes me very skeptical of EPCs, and I think it's one of the areas that I'm really passionate that I think the only true answer is in-home monitoring is to give a truly consistent experience for residents. I've been into hundreds of EPC C-grade properties, and I know that they all feel different. Some of them feel really warm, and some of them really don't feel warm. And that resident experience, I think, was something we try and it's something we try and present in the data. So you're able to give that consistency, irrelevant of what the EPC scoring is.
Yeah, and the same can be applied to other indoor environmental conditions as well. I think we assume sometimes that a street of the same archetype is going to be broadly similar, and we know from reality they can be extraordinarily different. There could be huge spectrums in outcomes, and with seemingly no cause sometimes, but it exists. And without that data, sometimes you just don't get to see it unless you can get in and out of each individual property.
So some of it is perfectly logical. So we work with I think we did a case study on this with Gen2 housing provider in Sunderland. They did a big retrofit of a tower block, and every one of those flats had the same EPC score, right? But on a tower block, if you lived on the north-facing side of the block, then your heating was on, to get the same temperature in your same EPC grade flat. I think, if I remember, I think it's 14 or 16% more fuel, to the 14 or 16% higher fuel bill to achieve the same average temperature with the same EPC. So there's some of this that just feels, well, of course we know that, right? Because it's going to be colder on the north side. Everyone, it's going to be warmer on the south side. Of course, it will be that. But actually turning that into a number, into a real experience, particularly when we're looking to place people in properties and thinking about affordability. Now, it's one of the reasons, and this again, I want to sort of place this for later in the conversation. It's one of the reasons that I really believe that the future is heat included within your rent, right? Is that the ownership and the responsibility for providing a warm property puts all the right influence and controls with the right party in my mind. You are delivering a high quality service for the resident that is consistent with better outcomes, but the risk and the ability to influence that risk is held with the person that has the bigger budget and is able to get the cheaper electricity, and it just sits right. So we really believe, and I particularly, it's a bit of a personal cause of mine, is that kind of anything that moves us towards the technology that moves us, enables us towards heat inclusive rent, will change many of the ills and the sort of the challenges that we see at the moment for tenants.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I think has always been really interesting about Switchee, and one of the reasons I've been talking to you guys for so long now, it must be coming up over 10 years, I guess, but
he's knocking on
getting
that, yes.
close.
Yes.
Yeah. Is that you started this journey out with a real social purpose.
Absolutely.
And still do. A very clear DNA about what you're trying to do. And many organizations in that space may not have that, but what I think it might be interesting to unpack a little bit is how an organization that had such a clear social purpose, that largely what you are delivering is very similar to what you started out intending to do, looking at things like
Yep.
fuel poverty and condensation risk and communication with tenants and all of that. And how you found that journey of knowing what you could do, understanding what you thought the actionable insights could be for your product, and how that journey evolved over those years of going, well, okay, we're giving this information, but it's either not landing, there isn't the organizational structure to handle the information, because the pathway that you've trod is a pathway that many sectors in the built environment, I think, are going to have to tread, and that is we've got something that does something, we're quite clear in what it's capable of doing, but how do we actually create value for the user of that technology or data in a meaningful way? And because you were first to market with this, you had to do the hard miles, I guess.
Look, I gotta put our cards on the table and say I don't think we were first to market on this. And it's interesting, you go, but I wasn't around in Switchee in those very early days. But you talk to the founders, and there was 3 or 4 products in the market that did broadly what we did, and I think we're very lucky to be here. We're very lucky to be here today, and I don't think any of them are. On many ways, our journey is a real classic technology adoption journey, right? You sort of take that classic kind of technology adoption curve. In the very early days, it really was the kind of crazy innovators that wanted to do this, and we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for a bunch of real visionary innovators and a really good chunk of government grant money, right? Because that's what gets you going in the early days, because nobody actually wanted to buy our product, and arguably we didn't have a product, right? We had a dream, right? And it was a combination of that capability of being involved in the grant funding and building up that kind of capability, and a bunch of early innovators that really got us on the map. So we will be forever grateful for those innovators. But the funny thing about those, and the sort of wonderful thing about those innovators, is they're only with you for a relatively short period of time, because pretty soon afterwards they're like, well, that was like last year's news. I want the next cool thing, right? You were like 2 years worth of cool thing again. I'm not interested. So you then very much have to move into the early adopters, and the early adopters have got a very different set of requirements. So in the early days we had a vision of IoT and what it was capable of, and the innovators were like, yeah, we'll feed it. Just give me a spreadsheet. I'll make it work. We'll do some cool stuff. Don't worry. I will fill all of the service gaps because I just believe in this, right? Amazing. The innovators very quickly were old news. You're then starting to work with the early adopters. The early adopters want to be cool. They want to try that first thing. They can see the potential. They're dreamers. They're believers. But they need more. They don't want to do the little. They don't want to sort of solder it themselves, right? They need you to then start putting more of a service wrap. And so we move from we'll just give you some data to actually just giving you some data isn't enough. We need to turn that data into some form of insight. We need to put a wrap around it, a software wrap that says, how do we do this? And if we give you that wrap, you then as an early adopter will have the clout within your organization to fill all of the rest of the service gaps. We're installing it at a small enough scale here that you can sort of do a few deals internally and make something work. We're still at the kind of that kind of charm and kind of space. And we spent a couple of years in that kind of space, and that we improved our offerings. It wasn't just the hardware plus data; it was the hardware plus the data plus the insights.
And that's where you're landing projects and case studies rather than a business relationship per se. You're not building a business case at that stage. It's let's get this into this estate and make it work for you here.
We're in a pilot place. We're in the classic pilot place, and I mean it's an overused joke, but it is like there are more pilots in housing than there is in British Airways, right? Because this is where people get stuck, right?
Yeah.
It is pilot after pilot after pilot, and and I think it was in the early days people were like, hey, I'll get 5 and I'll have a play with them, and then I'll get 50 and we'll do a couple of streets, and even I'll get 500 and we'll do an estate, but it's still very much a pilot. So the standard rules of procurement don't allow, the standard rules of the way it's got to work through the supply chain. I'd say we can work around that. It's all okay, right? That at some point you've got to get into the real world. And I think the real world and the scales that we're at now, which I think is early majority, and very much the behavior we're seeing as an early majority behavior. There's been sort of two big changes for that. One is that we've just really had to grow up as an organization, and there's a few areas in that. One, the quality of the product, people aren't on your side anymore. They're buying an enterprise grade product. So you've got to have your failure rate has got to be less than a boiler, right? If they're buying a boiler, they're buying a Switchee, they want to visit the property, they're cool with visiting the property because the boiler's broken. But if they're visiting the property because the Switchee's broken, you're not going to make any friends, right? And you're not going to go any further. So there's a whole kind of enterprise quality piece that needs to go across the threshold. And then secondly, you've got to be working with the supply chain. So in the past, it was like, yeah, we'll send you some boxes to your home address, right? Now we've got to be available in every city plumbing store, Travis Perkins, Wolseley. You've got to have all those commercial relationships set up so that people deliver into super centers. We've got pallets. We do pallets of Switchees out to people. How do you stack a pallet, right? All of that maturity piece in terms of supply chain then needs to happen. But the biggest change has been the maturity in the service proposition, because as you move into that early majority kind of that kind of space, that the power of the individual personality to fill gaps disappears. It has to stand up by itself, and so just providing an insight isn't enough, right? Because ultimately, if you provide the insight and people do nothing about it, it's not their fault. It's going to look like your fault. We tried Switchee, really nice, loads of great insights, but we didn't do anything with them, so we'll just sort of stop now. Right? And you've got to ultimately we have to take responsibility for the change being made, for the insight happening, and that's been quite a big journey. So we're out there. We've built out our customer success team. We're fantastic now, currently led by Kate Roberts. We've built out our analytics team, so we've now got an 8-person data science team and doing custom analytics for our customers. You want it cut a certain way, fine. You want it cut by estate, fine. You want it cut by archetype, fine. That ability to cut and slice and dice so that what's useful can be walked into a meeting with a decision maker to make something else happen. We've had to create those kind of capabilities, and we're constantly learning and feeding them back into the software product, but we've had to put a service wrap around that. And probably the biggest service wrap we've put in it recently has been customers are like, I need this faster. I just can't do it at the speed I need to do it at the moment. Can you install it for me? And back in the early days, we were like, well, we're never going to do that. We know what's going on. Now, a third of all Switchees are installed by our own network of contractors, and it starts becoming ever closer. What started out as a bit of electronics that became a bit of cloud and insight is now very much becoming we deliver outcomes for our customers, and that's what that kind of early majority wants. So much as to a point, it looks exactly the same. We are on the same mission. We are working for the same customers in the same market. To a point, the little box that gets screwed to the wall looks the same, but in terms of what we're delivering, it's really changed materially over that 8-year journey, so that now we've got the breadth and the capability to deliver an enterprise outcome rather than just some devices and a spreadsheet.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned customer success. I get the sense that there've been a really pivotal role in realizing the locked-in potential of those customers, because you are a SaaS model after all. You need sticky customers, and if you're going to retain customers long term, there has to be inherent success in that relationship.
Yeah, so customer success has been an absolute game changer for us. Really getting under what does the customer need. How are we adding value? A lot of that comes back into our product team. A lot of it comes back into our custom analytics team. We're constantly learning, but our customer success team, and we get asked this question ever more. I think I've been asked this question by two chief execs in the last week. Like not will this work? We know this is going to work. We know this is coming. How do we do it best? How do we transform our business best? And that's where our customer success team comes in, sharing the best practice across 130 different housing associations and local authorities. Not sometimes what doesn't work, but what what does work? How can you take that best practice and transform your organization? And again, that's that growth of that kind of service proposition. It's not just about how do we do it, but actually how do we have assurance that it's been done?
How does that speed and adaptability as a growing organization, that the ability to pivot and adapt quickly, how does that rub up culturally against some of the organizations that you're coming across? Because you're dealing with, at one end of the scale, absolute behemoths of organizations that would have enormously complex and slow moving governance and management structures within them, to middle-sized organizations that may have come from local authority housing and have very embedded ways of doing things, right the way to smaller organizations that might be quite adaptable. You're able to move, but ultimately the success of your product is as much in the hands of your customers as it is you. And I'm guessing a lot of what you're doing is around subtle organizational change management, almost, with these companies, of putting them in a place to get the benefit of this kind of technology.
Yeah, I think this comes back to being a mission-driven business, right? What we're trying to do, we're on a mission to deliver an outcome. We're not on a mission to sell boxes. We're not on a mission to get subscription numbers. Like, we're on a mission to deliver outcomes here. And I see too many small startup technology businesses getting a bit righteous, in a kind of like, we're right, and if you don't buy it, you're wrong. And housing is littered with the graves of people who are right, right? It's that being right in housing gets you nowhere. It's about, what have you actually changed? What have you actually delivered? And I think that, for us, it's ultimately being humble and taking responsibility. If we haven't delivered the outcome, then we haven't delivered. And we need to take that look at ourselves and make sure that our services and our capability and what we provide our customers delivers the outcome. And there's been some pretty painful bits on that, and we haven't always got it right. And in some cases, we've got it really wrong. But I'm really proud to say that where we have got it wrong, the relationship we've built with our customers, we've learned and got it right, has stood the test of time, and ultimately, I think has got a bit stronger. So it's not easy, and it requires us ultimately to take responsibility for the outcome, not the implementation.
Without delving into the details necessarily, what are the kind of things that you get wrong in that process as a technology deliverer and service deliverer? Is it dead ends you find yourself going down, or what is a wrong outcome for you in that kind of relationship?
Let me give you a classic wrong outcome. And again, we're a scale up business. We're trying to grow it. We're trying to do more. We're trying to have more impact. So if somebody, let's say a couple of months before financial year end, they say, "Hey, look, I've got a bit of money left in my budget. I'd like to purchase 1,000 devices. I'd like to, what, we're just going to do this, guys. We're just going to do this." My sales team are going to go, ding ding, just fine. Yeah, I'm going to give another, right? The instinct is to go, yeah, we'll do that. That's fantastic. We'll just sort of do it through a framework. We'll do it around the usual procurement. Don't worry about it, right? Every single one of those examples hasn't delivered value. And I tell you what happens classically time and time again is, one, the sort of people that do little back deals around procurement processes with a bit of money at the end of the year, the churn rate of them is quite high. It's quite high. So typically a year later, they're not in post, right? Bit of a correlation. And when they're not in post, they haven't connected you with anyone else inside the organization. So you haven't done the proper stakeholder management. You haven't understood what success looks like for the organization. And chances are most of those devices are going to be sat on a shelf somewhere, still in their boxes. And a customer's going to go, "Why am I working with Switchee? It didn't work." So there's been a real lesson learned for us, is that an easy deal is a bad deal, right? You've actually got to stop and say, no, I'm not going to, I appreciate you thinking of us. But we know that this only works if we have a proper stakeholder engagement from the off with the following departments. You can't just work around IT, right? They have to be on the journey. You can't just work around the customer team. They have to be on the journey. You can't just work around the repairs and the DLO team. They have to be on the journey. Because unless all of those people are on the journey together, this is going to be really hard work and probably isn't going to deliver anything for you. And that can be very difficult to have those kind of conversations. And, as a small business trying to have an impact, but we know that if you don't get the right stakeholder engagement to start with, if you're not clear about what success looks like, it's going to be almost impossible for you to achieve it.
Isn't that the same with almost any element of anything within business where it requires any kind of a change at the organizational level? If you're not having those conversations at the beginning, you're kidding yourself. And that's what I meant to ask. Is it the typical, there isn't a typical customer journey now, I guess, but because you've got such history behind Switchee. In the early days, you'd got nothing unless there was a trial, and then probably another one, and then some point down the road you managed to tie somebody into some kind of multi-annual agreement of some description. But a housing association coming to you these days, that there's any number of case studies, any number of housing associations that they could talk to that probably use your product. What does a good customer journey look like for somebody now that's looking to adopt technology like this into social housing? Does it start with the management team and that defining what good looks like conversation?
Absolutely. And again, I've had a couple in the last week. In both cases, we're very just flattered. It was a chief exec level in which it was the engagement started, but there was very much interestingly, in both cases, the chief exec was on the board of another housing association that we had a project with. So they were sort of pre-qualified to a point, but the conversation was very much with the executive team, with all the right stakeholders in the room. What are the problems that you're trying to solve? What are the particular pain points for you? They are all different, not necessarily in terms of the top 20, but actually when it comes to the priorities, different parts of the country, different stock levels, different demographics can drive different sets of requirements in that. And then what does success look like? How do we prove? And consistently the question is not, can we prove the technology works? I think that's largely agreed now. I hope that's a journey that we've been on. The conversations we're having now is from a chief exec mindset, can my organization do something with this? Right? I know it's going to come at some point, but if we're not ready now, then I need to understand that and make the changes so that we are ready in future. And so we do a lot of discovery work. We'll do the sort of stakeholder engagement with each of the different teams, and then come back with a set of success objectives that at an exec level, that team then agree to, and we can work with them on our customer success team, our transformation team, and our insights team can then work with them to execute.
So what kind of OKRs or KPIs are organizations looking for to benchmark success of something like this? You're a housing association, let's say middle ranking, 15, 20,000 homes. You think, right, okay, this is something that's we might have a damp and mold crisis on our hands. We've got some retrofit funding we're looking at. There's a whole number of reasons we might think to start pulling this kind of data. We're looking to roll this out. We've got a budget for it. How does somebody in a year's time benchmark that was a successful process with something like this kind of technology?
Really what you look at, and I think this is a bit of it's an assurance mindset, right? So how do I identify a problem and know that I've fixed it, right? It's like mold is a relatively, I say, straightforward one. It's straightforward in the sense that you don't have to look very far to find challenges. People will typically know there's a proportion of their stock built at a certain time or in a particular location. And what we're looking to do with our customers is on a sort of simple kind of proof point level, what's been identified, has something been done to change that, and do we know that it's subsequently changed and hasn't come back? Now, there are some softer metrics. There's a resident engagement through that journey is very important. The Ombudsman is very important about that. This is resident satisfaction journey. There's making sure that they feel feel engaged and good about what's happening. But ultimately, what you're doing here is there's a proportion of things that you've identified, and then what proportion of things you've identified have you fixed, and then what proportion of things that you fixed have stayed fixed. And that's what I talk about from a Switchee perspective on an outcome basis. Like, that's the measure, right? What, like, it's not like how many things we've identified isn't good enough. Particularly in the current climate, that's really not good enough. Knowing about it and not doing something is really not good enough. So what do you know about, what have you done, and then how do you know it stayed done? And to a point, retrofit's kind of the same, isn't it? Like, which properties do you know have got a problem? What have you done about the properties you've got to know in terms of energy performance? And then do you know down the line that's fixed it, right? And I think that's, we talk a lot to chief execs around about IoT being a really powerful way of quarterizing your problem, right? It's we don't want to show you a whole bunch of problems that more than you can cope with, more than you've got the budget with, so you suddenly start having to declare risk registers and downgrade. That's no good journey for anybody. What we want to do is help you really understand that problem such that you can fix it and then know that it stayed fixed. Right? That's the key thing. You won't have to go back again, and that you'll be able to be sort of dynamically monitoring change of tenants, change of weather conditions, change of whatever. You still know that that's fixed.
Yeah, and validation of spend is such a key metric for housing organisations, because there's so much spend everywhere all at once. Starting to define and unpack that question is one of the most powerful parts of the data from the built environment. As you point out, the stock condition element of it, it's useful to understand where the problems are, but that's only the starting point. If we were just going to keep all buildings the same forever, you wouldn't need the data, because what the data is about is taking buildings on a journey and understanding where you prioritize resources and evidence the efficacy of the spend you're putting into that process. And whether that's not eliminating damp and mold, but being able to evidence that an intervention that you spent money on had an impact, is as powerful as being able to say you've lifted that property out of being a red flag for damp and mold. Because a lot of these problems are not fixable with a silver bullet. Therefore, that data is going to be very powerful on this part of the journey we've got to go on of putting these buildings on a roadmap.
I think it's a really exciting time to be in the industry. I think we are genuinely going into uncharted territory here, right? Because we've had EPC as a proxy for energy performance for a long time now, but I think there's a general acceptance now it's not good enough and doesn't reflect true performance. How much mold is too much mold, right? What is your measure? I think we're seeing with Awab's law, and it is a real concern for me, I think we're seeing our ability to respond to complaints is an effective measure of no mold. Well, I don't like our experience is that that isn't necessarily a strong correlation, and that the amount of mold out there is significantly greater than the amount that's being complained about, particularly in some demographics, particularly in some sub-demographics that are very unlikely to complain about mold and yet still have a really big mold problem. So I think I think it's a really exciting time for housing, and the way I'd sort of characterize it is I think housing is being rightly so considered as a piece of infrastructure now, and I think that housing is a fundamental piece of infrastructure in the UK, in the same way as the roads and the railways and the airports and the electricity pylons are fundamental to how we operate as a country. But we've got measures for performance of railways, and we've got safety standard expectations and definitions that we have for our pylons, but we're on quite an early learning journey here in housing, right? And and you're seeing that across the board here in terms of consumer standards and expectations, in terms of professionalism and qualifications within the sector, and in terms of the measures that we and the metrics that we hold ourselves accountable to. But it's a very exciting time. This is a journey that many other sectors have been on over time. The railways were a wild, wild west for a bit. Everyone's running different gauges, everyone's running different stuff, and it became right. No, this is a national infrastructure. We will regulate, we will manage, and controls in place. And I think it's a very exciting time to be in housing. I think technology is critical to enabling that.
Yeah, and I do want to come on to this idea that you talk about around a digital operating model, but I suppose at the heart of all of that is this shift in focus from housing being an asset to a provision of homes and quality of life for people, a foundation for which people can reach their potential, not an asset to manage its degradation and investment and divestment in and out of.
But we've only got the data on the assets, right? We've only got the data on the assets. So I think housing is not an asset class, right? I think it's quite a uniquely British thing, and it's something I really get on my high horse about. Like, I don't think you can consider it as an asset class. I think you have to consider it as a fundamental piece of the foundation of infrastructure of society, right? It is no housing like this it's going to get really messy really quickly, and I think in places we're starting to see that. Housing is absolutely critical here, and we need to consider it in a broader context. And we've been doing a lot of lobbying. I think who knows whether we're going to see a change of government, but it's probably more likely than not we will see a change of government. We've done a lot of lobbying of both parties coming into the election to say someone's got to start joining the dots between housing, healthcare, and social care. Right? They are not separate budgets. They cannot have such hard lines drawn between them, because they are fundamentally part of the same thing, and in this and by looking at it as a whole, and by understanding how these parts work together, I think ultimately we can deliver something that's better for people. If I'm going to discharge you from hospital, and it might be wonderful that you've got some care support at home, but if that home's 14 degrees, like there's a pretty good chance you're going to be back soon, right? And the cost of heating that home to 18 degrees might be £1,000 a year. The cost of having you overnight in a hospital is going to be £2,000 to £3,000. So we're sort of lost. I think we've just lost a little bit here. And I think both parties, and there's a big bit of thinking about this at the moment. But I couldn't agree more. Housing is part of the fabric of society. It's not an asset class.
Well, you can imagine you're pushing on open doors with me, Tom, being an air quality and building health person. The indoor environment and air quality is the single biggest environmental risk we face as a human species, and it has almost incalculable impacts on society when we get it wrong. And damp and mold is just one small jigsaw piece of how we're getting that wrong. And I think it's interesting that refocusing of that sector doesn't sit in isolation. You can imagine, as hard as it is in social housing, that's an even harder argument with all the split incentives of private rented and home ownership to deal with, notwithstanding the non-residential sector. But even the residential sector, there's this fundamental shift in ideas now where we start to understand that so much of our bottom line is wrapped into the health and well-being and productivity of the people that occupy those spaces. For social housing, what's interesting is housing organisations don't sit in isolation. They're part of communities. Those communities' ability to earn, be healthy, contribute to society is all wrapped up in the security of tenure of the places that they live in and the health and security that they provide. And we'd be crazy if we didn't see it in any other way.
I think you're absolutely bang on, but the whole kind of we're crazy debate, I don't think largely we do see it in those terms. And I think for a long time now we've seen it in quite different terms. And it's only relatively recently that we appreciated quite how bad things were. There's been a lot of sort of exposés on that, and there's some pretty horrible stories that have come out of it. but there's been a real blindness to this. And I think that's one of the things that I'm really passionate about from a technology perspective. And we talked about standards, but there is a significant proportion of the population that don't interact with other systems and we don't know what's going on, and we're not able to help. Yeah, I mean, the strange thing that we found with Switchee is that actually the resources to help, we've never run out of our customers having the resources to help, right? They've never got to a point where they've gone, now we don't have any more, cold homes vouchers. We don't have any more, kitchens that we can replace. We don't have any, that's never been a conversation we've had. But what they consistently are saying is we don't know how to best allocate the resources. We don't know who needs it most. And I think that answering that question is pretty powerful. It's not the one with the best ROI, but in terms of helping you sleep at night, I think it absolutely is. There's a significant silent proportion of the population that could have a better quality of life, and I think we've got the resources to do it if we can just join the dots. And technology is that way.
And I see this very much in ventilation. Housing organisations really struggling to define, a bit like the conversations you're having with your type of technology, is defining what good actually looks like for them, and having the systems and strategies and workflows in place to actually deliver that they're at sea when it comes to the provision of good ventilation in homes, because they've always operated on a kind of a replace like with like model, or put that type of a fan in all homes that have a problem. They've never really approached it from well, what does this home need, and how do I evidence that choice has been effective? And this is this brave new world that we're moving into, which I guess feeds into this digital operating model idea that the landscape could be significantly different if viewed through a different lens, couldn't it?
It could, but I also, I suppose, I'm quite excited about how close it is too, right? So we're working with, we've got a little skunkworks project we're doing at the moment with one of the UK's largest ventilation providers, and just the ability to take fan data and feed it back centrally becomes really exciting really quickly, right? And the impact to the cost of the fan is maybe £1, maybe a couple of quid, right? But you take it from being a dumb device to being a connected device, with people buying what they were going to buy anyway, pretty much on a standard specification. The incremental cost across the whole house is £5, and the net result is that you've actually got quite a smart, capable, understanding bit of model there that is doing some really cool stuff. So I don't think we are that far from where that's also what gets me out of bed in the morning, is we're pretty close. We're pretty close, right? But we do need, but it's just really getting us to think about the problem differently.
Yeah, and starting to think about it as provision of housing for a service, or heat as a service, or that kind of digital operating model kind of thing.
What is the outcome we're trying to do here? What is the and for us, it's about the quality of life for people living in rented homes, and that's more, that is broader than just it being warm, right? That's a much greater kind of understanding. But I think that aligns with why everyone got into housing to start with. Ultimately we are aligned, but that's how do we get some metrics in there, and we want to be part of that journey.
Yeah. What are the kind of problems that you're coming up against from a scaling perspective? Because, I mean, obviously you've got your own internal challenges from a scaling perspective, but you're bringing a lot of your customers through a scaling process as well. And they're moving from perhaps case studies and projects or certain area deployments to broader scales. That must be a very significant challenge for a lot of organizations trying to do that.
Yeah. Look, it definitely is. I think one of the key things was, when I sort of come onto this kind of digital operating model piece, is that I think that the skills in housing for a proactive model are quite different from the skills in housing for a reactive model. And I don't talk about that in the, and please play your bingo with me on this, but I don't talk about that particularly in terms of the technology. I do talk about that particularly in terms of the mindset, the skills within the team, and the sort of the ability for process change. I think housing is, when you're very good at reactive, you have firefighters that want to get up and deal with an inbox full of difficult things, and you have people, buzzing. It all feels a bit apprentice, but on the phone dealing with challenges, and we're listening. What's come through on the call center today, right? There's quite a I say this, and I've said this before, like, housing a bit wants to be needed, right? And as we move from reactive to proactive, we actually have to try and make ourselves not needed. And that is a different mindset, right? That is, how do I eliminate myself? How do we have no repairs? And even more controversially, how do we have no ombudsman, right? Like, how do we move to a place where this isn't about how fast we react to complaints? Could you run housing lights out, right? Like an Amazon, like an Amazon warehouse, right? Like an Ocado packing center, right? That's got to be the mindset. That's a much more efficient model. But it's quite a big change in mindset, that we're trying to put the systems and processes in place to eliminate ourselves. And that becomes about understanding a problem, a capability, particularly on the data front, to understand what the data is required. It becomes on a process change capability, that we are constantly updating our processes, not every 10 years when a new piece of legislation comes through, maybe every 10 weeks, as we have a better understanding of the key problems that are being faced at the coal faces. It means that with our DLOs and with our outsourcing, we don't outsource in a 5-year contract that locks us into a particular way of working, that actually we start operating much more dynamically, whether that's an Uber model or a Plentific style model. I wouldn't want to say, but you got a much more dynamic way of working that's responding to the challenges. You look at an American football team. You've got an offensive team and a defensive team. We sort of need a winter team and a summer team. It's so different in the needs and the requirements and the way that people operate. Right?
Yeah.
It's a different mindset, but the fundamental thing in that kind of operating model for me is how do we is that kind of is the journey that the vehicle manufacturing went on over the sort of the 60s and the 70s. That changed from being, we've just got to do more and we've got to have as many people as possible and react to problems, to how do we eliminate problems? How do we eliminate ourselves? How do we make this thing so it's a high quality service, lights off? And that's a really big change in mindset.
Yeah, and I suppose the kind of business as a service model has typically been the realm of cutting edge, very reliable products if they're managed and serviced and designed and used properly. You think of your Rolls Royces and your Apache helicopters and all of the stuff that works as a service delivery model. But I'm trying to think of a as a service business model that starts with something that's fundamentally broken. It's not only got to deliver something efficiently, it's also got to fix it to get it there for it to work efficiently. So you've got two tracks at the same time. You've got a moving from a reactive state and a dealing with a resource that's so fundamentally uninvested in, to a state where you can have that kind of operating model working like the others do, that is doing this stuff efficiently, that doesn't require service and maintenance. That's a huge task. That's a really interesting puzzle to unpack.
I think it's a really fun journey. I think it's a really, really fun journey to be on. I think what I think is sort of pretty interesting in the market at the moment has been the rise of the for-profit housing providers. Yeah. This is a real game changer for the sector, and I think we're just only at the very early journey of quite how much of a game changer that's going to be. So at the moment, you look at the for-profit providers. They've come in. They've largely bought brand new stock. But they've done it. They're very much operating a digital model. Working with all of them. It's very much a digital first style structure. Now, I think in the early days, people could have definitely turned their nose up at that. It's not the you don't have legacy stock. You don't have the remains of a large scale stock transfer. You're sort of cheating if you're just doing the easy stuff. But that narrative is changing, and I think they're learning and evolving. They're learning a lot and evolving a lot quicker. They'll openly say they got some stuff wrong in the early days, and they're learning and evolving, but they're starting to take on a different stock profile. They're starting to take on significantly large pieces of stock profile, change of stock profile. I don't think we're that far from a small failing housing association being handed over lock stock to one of the for-profit providers, and that does become quite interesting. So I do to a point say it's a little bit unfair for them. They get to sort of start with a clean sheet of paper, perhaps, but there is a new model coming in, and it is scaling, and I do think it is going to be really quite different.
So if you were to try and describe what this idea of a digital operating model is, how would you kind of concisely frame it, Tom?
Yeah, and I suppose it's sort of back to my lights off factory, right? It should just work.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it should all just work, right? And you really consider that any requirement to fix something is, to a point, a failure. And if it is a failure, how do we make it as quick as possible? How do we fix something as early as possible? How do we do our maintenance preventively? How do we stop things from being a problem to start with? Very much a kind of real preventative mindset across the whole of the service delivery. If we don't want there to be mold, how do we solve the problem of mold, right? So we could monitor it, and the key drivers on there are going to be the ventilation in the property. There's going to be the temperature inside the property. It's going to be the amount of humidity generated by the resident. Each of those that we can engage with, so we can look at ventilation that operates automatically and resolve some of the challenges. From a heat perspective, we can include it into the cost base. From a resident perspective, how are we engaging and enabling them to understand what the uses are? Do they need a screen on the wall that's telling them when the humidity is too high, so that they can be proactive in it? All of those can stop mold ever happening to start with, and they can happen within technology that already exists, the technology that's largely being bought already. And again, it's why we've got to look at a kind of a lights off housing service. Now, that doesn't mean that we never engage with residents. What that means is that when we spend our money, we spend it adding the most value, engaging with residents, right? So we're having conversations with residents about improving their outcomes, not fixing their broken stuff, or not repairing their asset, and not, we have two conversations with residents. Have you paid your rent? And tell me about your repair. Like, you can't run a relationship like that. But if we solve the problems, we're able to have that conversation much more proactively. So for me, that's not been a concise summary. And he did ask for a concise summary, so I'll probably have to think of a better one afterwards. But as a mindset, it's saying, right, this doesn't break, and if it does break, how do we prevent it from breaking, right? And we have that real kind of that proactive, let's fix ahead of time kind of mindset.
Yeah, I think as an idea, that's very concise, Tom. I mean, the only way it becomes more concise is if you give it over to marketing for a couple of weeks to try and put some blurbs
Turn
around
it into a sentence.
Yeah,
Give it
exactly.
to me as a sentence.
Yeah. What's the tagline?
I'm doing the feedback to me. Hey, look, you want. This isn't like a. I'm trying to think like a. This doesn't mean that residents don't have engagement with the housing association and their local authority. I think it means the complete opposite. I mean, it means that the money that we're spending is spent on increasing and delivering better outcomes, not fixing stuff that could have been fixed 2 years ago.
Yeah,
for a fraction of the cost.
And ultimately, you are operating in a split incentive environment with a tenant and a landlord, and the landlord is not your only customer here. You're the tenant, the homeowner, real people, real families with real lives. They're also the customer here, aren't they? And these kind of ideas around what good looks like, what a good user experience should be. It's
and that's why for us, we run our development roadmap in what we call lockstep. So we're always thinking about the features that will benefit landlords and the features that will benefit tenants. Because if we lose the relationship with tenants, like we lose our we lose our right to operate. We need to earn the right to be inside people's homes, and we're very aware of that. And delivering a high quality service to them is really important. It can't just all be about the landlords. And that's to a point where I just don't believe in little white boxes with red flashing lights placed around the property. I don't think that's a great resident experience. I can see how it can deliver outcomes, but I think you need to be up front and center and have an open, constructive relationship with tenants. Treat them as you would want to be treated. And the way we do that is by being intentionally visible and intentionally adding value.
Perhaps for people that don't know Switchee, maybe just describe, because we've been wittering away here now for nearly an hour.
If they've hung in for an hour,
well done. Yeah, I will.
Yeah, well done.
I will introduce you. Don't worry before we start. That's for sure. But again, in one of your classically concise manners, Tom, let's describe to people what a.
I'm not sure if you're being ironic.
No, genuinely, you are very good at describing what you do. I mean, you need to be, I'd say, because it is you can get lost in explaining the detail in this stuff, but fundamentally, Switch is about a certain thing, isn't it? Perhaps describe what it is it's actually trying to do and where it sits in the built environment as a product.
Great. So Switchee exists to improve the quality of lives for people living in rented homes. That's been our mission since day one. It's still very much our mission today. Our belief is that in improving the quality of life for people living in rented homes comes from really two things in lockstep. One is about empowering tenants to better understand the environment in which they live, to help them make better decisions about how they consume energy, about how they understand the air quality, about how they interact with the home in which they live in, but also help the landlord or help the housing association or help the provider of that home understand the performance of the property and how the behavior of the resident is interacting with the property, because we all very much interact differently. And so we have a package of insights, analytics, services that helps landlords do that, and we have a bit of hardware that's installed inside the home that helps the tenant better manage their energy and better understand the environment that they're in. But ultimately, the outcome is a better quality of life for people living in rented homes.
Yeah, measurably better quality of life.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Definitively measurably. We want to be at the very much the bleeding edge of defining what those measures are. Right. It has to be measurably. It has to be to a standard, and we want to be part of the journey that gets that out there.
And where do you see your role in Switch's journey? You've been brought on with a very particular goal of bringing it from that startup phase, founders phase, which is just trying to keep it alive and fight and scrap and do all the stuff that poor founders have to do, to maturing the business and bringing it on to this high growth phase. And in fact, you're now international as well. So like it's a big body of work you've undertaken.
Yes, but to a point, no. And you said at your start, like the mission was there 8 years ago. The vision was there 8 years ago. And the bit I really love doing is just putting a rocket under something, right? I think that all the components were there. Any business, there's a significant luck chance you've got to be in the right place at the right time with the right people. I'm very excited that this is the right time. I think we had the right people. We've got some fantastic investors that believe in our mission, not just in our P&L, which does really matter. And then it's just a case about building a great team. And I think the great thing about I've said great a number of times there. The exciting thing about a scale-up business is that as you build momentum, you get access to stuff you didn't have before, right? But in terms of capital, in terms of people, in terms of opportunities, in terms of relationships, and I'm just constantly trying to build the momentum, chase the bottleneck, put the dream team together, and so far we've been very lucky on that journey. We've got some fantastic people.
And how many people are now employed in the UK with Switchee?
I think 87 when I checked yesterday.
Wowzers. Okay. Yeah, that's incredible. And is that pretty well balanced across the departments within, or is it very heavily sales and customer success focused, or do you have where's the kind of the balance of the organization sit with those numbers? Because you're not manufacturing, are you, as such?
No, we don't. So we don't have a we contract manufacture. We contract manufacture here in the UK, and we have done since our inception. We've got 2 partners that manufacture for us, one in High Wycombe and one in South Wales. Those both to manufacture to very high standard and enable us to keep very close to our customers. In terms of the team itself, I only laugh. We've just gone through the budgeting cycle, and all I can tell you is that everyone would like more people.
Yeah,
There's no, everyone would like more people. I think if you were to look at it sort of roughly, it's about a third of our team are focused on making the product amazing. So that's going to be the technology team, devices, cloud, firmware, hardware. It's the product team. They are working on delivering every month something new to customers, whether that's a capability, whether that's a particular improvement that's been requested. But there's very much that kind of metronome. What's coming out this month? About a third of our team sit on our customer facing, so that's customer success, the account management team, the business development team, the marketing team, and they're out very much having conversations in the market, events, road shows, doing a lot of listening, a lot of engaging, and making sure that feedback comes into the product team. And then the rest of the remaining third of the organization is the sort of the behind the scenes that really makes it tick. So we've got our operations team, that's the people that sort out the logistics and manufacturing and the that are training installers, that are making sure it all adds up at the end of the month. That kind of capability. So we still do really focus on the development of the product. Like, we don't think this is a finished article. We are on a constant learning journey from our customers in the market. How do we bring something new every month?
Yeah, interesting. And you're also very strong on culture in Switchee. I think that's something that you really get a sense of talking to people that work at Switchee. That's something you're quite passionate about, and you're also B Corp as well, aren't you?
Yeah, and I think that really comes from being mission led. That's this. There is a lot easier things to do, right? And when you're taking on brilliant people, and you're like, look, we want to be a brilliant person, but we've got a really hard challenge here. Now, the prize is possibly the greatest prize out there, but it's going to be really hard, and it's going to take a long time. And it's not going to be B2B SaaS. It's not going to be flipping fashion. This is a fundamentally big challenge. I think that excites a particular group of people, and it's really great to get those sort of people on board. We're one of the first B Corp people in social housing, and it was actually very much a team-led initiative. Thankfully, it was supported by investors. They also have a number of other B Corps that they've invested in, because you actually got to change your articles, right? It's not just about ticking some boxes and putting out a press release, right? You actually have to rewrite the articles of your organization to make a board level commitment, not just to your investors. You've actually got to tell your investors they are less important, right? You've got to come back and say, no, this is about our impact on the planet. This is about our impact on our community. This is about our impact on our employees. This is about our impact on our customers. And you've got to rewrite your articles around that. And that's, thankfully that was an easy conversation for us, because it really aligned both with the investors that we have and the mission that we're on. But no, we're very, very, very proud to be part of the B Corp movement. It very much aligns to what we're looking to do anyway. And to a point, we've talked about measures and bars and standards, but it's really good to have a standard. How do you know that your maternity paternity policy is good, right? How do you know that it meets good standards, right? Great, fantastic. B Corp's really great for that. And actually, I think we'll be announcing some more investment shortly. We're being invested in by a B Corp, right? Because that matters to them. And you're starting to see an ever stronger community around this set of standards, around this kind of market, around this kind of space. And that's just really exciting to be part of. People are coming to us and saying they want to join us, because that is important to them. And I think the next generation particularly really care about that. They want to be part of something, when I came out into the job market, people wanted to go home and tell their mum and dad a brand they'd heard of, right? And I don't think that's the case anymore. People want to go back and tell their mum and their dad and their partner and their dog and their cat that they've made a difference, right? And I don't think that correlates with a brand that you've heard of necessarily.
Yeah.
And so it's really exciting that people want to come and join us with that. And finally, I think just most importantly, like, we just try and treat everyone like adults. My belief, and I'm very lucky that the founders align with me, and again, the board aligns with me, is like, you shouldn't need policies, right? You should just treat people like adults, right? So we have an unlimited holiday policy, right? Because I just hate when it's 25 days, right? Like, and then by the time you've had a couple of broken fridges and you've got to be in for the gas man for something, and you're like, that's not holiday, right? I think people need a week off every quarter. We're pretty hard and pushing on it. It's a metric that we monitor. Just for your own sanity, you need a week off every quarter. Take it. Plus some extra bits, school cover or dog cover, or you need this. We don't just expect a lot from people. Our team expect a lot from themselves, right? And we've got to provide the support and around that. And that's why we fully remote working, fully flexible working. I believe it. I believe it works. Many people are going back into the office. We are absolutely not. No, we are committed to this model, and it really works for us.
And how have you found you've started to peer over the precipice of other markets? How have you found that exercise because obviously the UK social housing is such a big sector that there's been years of work available to you just to get to where you are. But you look over into markets like France or Belgium or the Netherlands, and all of them have long traditions of social housing. How have you found that experience as an organisation that's mission led, looking at other countries?
I think we've learned a lot. We absolutely have plans to really make a meaningful impact more broadly in Europe. A couple of things that have come across to that. So one, I think in terms of the problem that we solve is absolutely valid in those markets. Like, there's no contest whatsoever. That is absolutely, how we go about solving it actually is quite fundamentally different. I think we have a naivety at points that we thought we could just drag and drop the UK model into other markets. We now know that's just not going to work. That said, what we deliver in our outcome is needed by those markets. So I think, as we move into Europe, there are some markets where we may take a version of the UK market. I think in most markets we'll look to either partner, resell, acquire a local specific capability that we can then put our wrap on, and we can put our learning, and we can put our analytics, and we can put our scale on. So it definitely has been a learning journey for us, but we're really excited that what we do and what we can bring is as valid in France, Holland, Denmark, Belgium, Canada as it is here in the UK.
Yeah, who knew? Like, a fundamental human need of good housing, and perhaps even a digital operating model was going to be needed everywhere else. It's just interested to understand how so is the difference. Is it a difference in how you do business, or is it a difference in the fundamentals of how social housing is structured, or is it a bit of everything that makes it different?
I think there's sort of two things to it. One, the archetype of UK social housing is pretty different from how other people have done it. And that's pretty unique in terms of when we built social housing and the specification we built it to. I mean, this would be direct. Like, Dutch social housing is largely a higher standard than here in the UK, and a lot of that was because it was built later. It was built to a much more standardized. You're talking about a smaller geographic area. So that definitely is one change. The heating system isn't as big a change as perhaps we thought it would be. There's still a lot of combi boilers out there. There's a lot of heat pumps. There's a lot of heat networks, and that's all really very, very similar. I think the definition of social is quite different. I mean, Holland's a really interesting market, for example. So 37% of all Dutch housing is social housing. To be applicable for social housing, you've got to have a wage of the national average or below. So it's much more sort of social, much broader demographic, much more kind of mixed communities. And I was chatting to a Dutch housing provider, and it was just after the story we had in the UK where somebody was found dead in their property, right? And the response in the UK was, that's horrific. Get the chief exec of the housing association on ITV apologising. Right? That was very much the mindset. That same conversation in Holland, the Dutch conversation was, that's the responsibility of the community. How sad is it that community, those people that live nearby, the family, let that happen? There's a different sense of responsibility in how things are managed, but there is the same driver towards mold-free homes. There is the same driver towards energy efficiency and understanding, the performance of the asset. So there are subtle changes, but there's the fundamental of a high-quality home is the same for everybody.
Yeah, so a lot of it is just framing and perspective. It can be
Absolutely.
Quite subtle but meaningful in its difference.
You can't massively meaningful. You can't just translate what we do here in the UK. Like it is the same as an outcome, but very different as a journey.
Yeah, really interesting. How did you end up at Switchee, Tom? What was your kind of journey to there? You're known now for this kind of scale-ups phase of these types of businesses, I guess.
Yeah, this is the bit I really enjoy doing. I was very. I'm an engineer. I'm a controls engineer, chemical and controls engineer, which is my team don't let me anywhere near the controls, but it's definitely like it's close to heart. Control. I was doing control systems all the way through uni and summer projects and stuff. But at university, I joined a consultancy firm, spent a lot of time in manufacturing and really improving manufacturing processes, chasing the bottlenecks, high quality controls standards. It's very much a world I really care about. But the exciting thing there was the business that I joined was sort of 12 people when I joined and 180 when I left 7 years later. And that growth journey was just incredible. I just absolutely loved it. And from then on, I sort of committed I'm going to spend the rest of my career doing that kind of scale up piece. So I spent a couple of years, ran my own consultancy in financial services, and then spent a bit of time in governance, which one of my first sort of interactions with social housing. And then did another business that did fibre into social housing first, all sort of turnaround kind of scale up kind of stuff. And through that fibre business, my team at that fibre business were like, Switchee is amazing. This is fantastic. Oh my God, they know everyone. The Switchee people are amazing. And through that, I was sort of made an introduction to Adam, the chief exec at the time, and just really sort of fell in love with the business and the people and the mission. And no, it was a gamble, but it is still my belief, and I still tell everyone that joins that I think in 10 years' time, every social home, I think every rented home in Europe will have a bit of technology like ours, and the challenge for us and for us is to make it our technology, right? We don't have any right for it to be us. There's no requirement for it to be us. We need to be product centered, service centered, outcome centered, so that people choose us. But they're going to choose somebody because this model and this digital led model is absolutely coming.
Yeah, and I spotted that at the very early stages with Switchee, and it's been a soapbox of mine ever since, that I firmly believe there.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, there isn't. I don't think realistically there'll be a space that we occupy within the decade that doesn't have some form of data coming out of it about the environment that you're in, and
absolutely
that changes everything. It fundamentally changes all of the conversations that we have about the built environment. And for me, that's what's so fascinating about this. It removes the dark corners to hide behind, and it removes the obfuscating and the can kicking that we see in this sector, because you will live and die. Your brand or your organization or your job will hinge on the ongoing performance of the assets that you manage or build or design. It's as simple as that. And that in the same way, many other sectors have had to get around that. We look at the automobile sector. It lives and dies by the data that comes out of its sector now,
Yeah, I think you're spot on there. I think housing is going to follow a relatively well-tread journey that we've seen in other sectors. I don't think anything that's going to happen here hasn't happened somewhere else. That doesn't make it easy, right? And that doesn't mean that's going to happen over a short period of time. But I do think the journey that we're treading here is a well-tread journey, and we've got a real opportunity now at this stage to define it, to make it happen, to make that a really meaningful change.
Yeah, some of it's so analogous to other sectors. It's frightening, actually, when you break it down and frame it in the right way. You go, well, that's just like what they did. And one of them is performance, which is a great segue onto this discussion that we were having about this transition from modelling and guesswork to measuring. You've been really heavily involved in that kind of perspective at Switchee now for a few years. I'm just thinking the heat loss transfer coefficient work that you did as part of the studies.
I think we're like, I don't want to undermine the value of the model, right? I think a model is a really valuable thing. I'm running models in my business all the time. At a top level, you need a model to estimate something. But the true performance is what actually happens, and validating that model with the real world. And it's the real world, and particularly once we start getting humans involved, it's that whole classic, like, teaching would be so much better if there's no kids.
Yeah.
Right? Like, housing would be so much better if there was no tenants. Oh my God, it'd be so straightforward. The thing would be as you left it. That is, I think there's too much of that mindset, too much of an asset focused mindset, that tenants are inconvenient to a well-maintained asset. We're here for the tenants, for the people. That's why social housing exists, for the people and the outcomes. And so we need to focus the data around that. And I don't think you can do that ultimately with a model. I think you have to do that with understanding what's going on. I do want to say, though, that doesn't mean that we have to sort of censor up every social house like the Starship Enterprise, right? That is not the intent. It's not like suddenly we've got to put a 20 grand's worth of sensors across every property. It's about saying, how can we take the minimum amount of data, real world, real-time data, to deliver the maximum amount of benefit? That's the challenge we constantly have ourselves at Switchee, because every time we add a sensor, we add cost, we add failure, right? How can we do most of the smart stuff in the algorithm? Yeah, we could put a sensor in every room, but most social homes are 60, 80 square meters, right? Like, surely we can do that smarts in the algorithm. So the answer is going to be a bit of a combination of the two, but ultimately I think we need something physically in the home to reconcile that model against, to ensure that we deliver outcome. And that could be a handful of sensors and a smart meter. That could be all it is, and I think that could get us everywhere we need to go. But model alone, I really don't believe is enough, particularly where it's enough for an asset, but it's not enough for people.
Yeah. What would they say? Models are never accurate, but sometimes useful. It's absolutely. It serves a purpose. Talking to Richard Corsoy last week on particulate matter, and they look at 3 levels really of assessing air quality from a particulate matter perspective, and the least preferable is the modelling. It serves a purpose because what modeling's very good at is you can remove a child for a week and put one back in, or shrink the size of the house, or
that sounds pretty useful,
or put it somewhere else in the country. So you can do stuff with models that you can't do in the real world. So they present some use to frame certain questions, but they're not the real world. And I'm working with a big estate just west of Dublin at the moment, where all 240 homes are massively underventilated. It's just a given, right? We know they're significantly underventilated. Yet there's a huge spectrum and diversity of outcomes within that development. So often what poor performance doesn't mean a defined outcome. It can mean an amplification of problems or scenarios. And that's what data unpacks for you, is that what you're actually facing. And for housing associations, that's fantastic because they can focus resources more effectively. They may have 240 homes they need to fix at some point in the next 5 years, but you know what? This year, they can start over there and not worry about over there. And that's what measurement does for you, is that you can't manage what you don't measure, I suppose, which is another. I've just done a bingo one there of I think
tick. That's
yeah,
yours.
that's my
That's all
one.
yours. Well done.
Yeah.
No, I couldn't agree more, and I think it's that variability of outcomes. Also, for me, it's about the rate of change. Interesting that the landlord the housing association I was chatting to yesterday, where they got 18% of Gen Z. What they're seeing is the rate of change significantly has increased with Gen Z. Like there's a higher turnover of partners, there's a higher change of occupancy, there's a high just the rate of patterns changing is significantly higher than they've ever seen in the past. And by being able to help them with more of a real-time measurement means that they can react quicker. It might never have been a problem in the future, but it is going to be a problem within a month, right? And how do we get on that and react to that and be dynamic in our understanding? And they've all got EPCC. Right? It's about getting in there and really understanding what's going on. And that's how I think housing will always have a finite resource. There's never going to be some sort of infinite pot here. But if we have a finite resource, we want to spend it on the best possible outcomes and helping the most people. And that doesn't mean reacting to emergency repairs. That means about actually looking at how do we improve life outcomes. And that's what we're really passionate about.
And what do you think that means for housing then over the next, in this transition? Let's just say within a decade, we're moving to let's just say a significant proportion of housing employing some element of data, environmental data and energy data and heating control data. What does that journey look like for housing, do you think, over the next, say, 5 years?
So I think we're seeing some interesting, really good behaviours at the moment. I think we're seeing some, more concerning behaviours. Let's talk about the good stuff. Like SHDF has been a real journey, but there's been a lot of iteration around the SHDF piece. And I think that it's been a really powerful in terms of building up a skill set, building up an understanding, building up a capability in retrofit. And ever more so, the data element of that has been increasing. I think the Welsh Government have been really leading the way on this, doing a fantastic job. Scott's a little bit further behind. But SHDF has been very interesting. And you're starting to move when you meet the people leading that team. They've very much got a vision of bang for your buck retrofit. And I just couldn't agree anymore with that, right? It's not about whether I can tick a bunch of boxes. It's about, is it any different for the person, right? Have we actually changed the outcome here? And I think that's very exciting for SHDF. And I think that has really created a real momentum and a capability and within the UK and within England and within housing associations to look at what's the true impact here, not what boxes are we going to tick on retrofit. So I think that's really exciting. And I think as SHDF rolls out, as the retrofit journey rolls out, we will be backfilling that with data. We will be assuring that with data, and we'll be proving over a longer period of time, because we're going to be financing over a longer period of time, that we have that certainty that we have delivered change. That all feels really great and moving in the right direction. I've probably got more concerns around Awab's law and some of the pieces coming here. We've been very open about this and responded to consultation. We absolutely want mold out, right? But if we're driving a system that's more orientated about how quickly you respond to complaints, all of our resources will go on how do we respond faster, how do we react faster, rather than how do we solve the problem to start with. I haven't got any money to solve the problem because I'm reacting. All my resources are going on reacting. And we start seeing some difficult things. If I need to react, do something within, let's say I have to do something within 7 days at the point at which I know there's a problem. I don't want to look at reverse incentives here, but I'm probably going to raise the standard for a problem, and I'm probably going to reduce the standard for a something, right? And what are we going to end up with? We're going to end up with a much higher threshold for mold to be taken seriously and a lot more mold washes because they can be done quickly, right? We're not solving the problem, right? We're not understanding. You've got to wait until your mold is worse and then it doesn't get fixed properly. And that's just going to drive more and more and more cost into the system. So I think there's two metrics. One, I think that the longer term thinking of SHDF is having a really positive impact, and I'm really excited about that flowing across all the way across. I do have some real concerns about Ours Law, and yes, we're really proactively trying to influence the conversation on this. Let's make those mold measures proactive rather than just being on our ability to react, which is important but can't be the be all and end all. Otherwise, we're going to create a bunch of perverse incentives here.
Well, as you said at the beginning, it's the start of the journey. the stock condition piece, the reacting to a problem is the start of a building's journey. And when it comes to something as complex as moisture balance in buildings, this is not something that you're necessarily going to fix in year one. And my big concern over the Arab's law and a lot of the motivation behind all of that is we need to solve this problem. And the reality is it's a bit like the sustainability journey. This is a 10, 15, 20 year program to sort underinvested housing out and move buildings from a state of being in moisture imbalance to in moisture balance, because it's a complex mix of how people operate their homes, the structures, the ventilation systems, the context that they live in. We've seen this with the fuel poverty crisis and the climate,
which is changing.
Yeah, all of these things have massive bearing on outcomes in that sector. And my big concern over this process is that what happens is that we build an expectation that something's going to change. And over next winter and the winter after that and the winter after that, when mold keeps coming back, because it will, because unless you're going to wholesale fix a lot of the problems, you will get some amount of it back. And unless
once it's there, it's there.
Once it's there, it's there. And if you've got a fundamental problem, you've got a fundamental problem. The key is the data, is that are we making meaningful progress in the right direction as part of that journey? And that was my introduction, ironically, to Switchee all those years ago, was kind of Thamesmead condensation damper mold, that famous project back in the day where it was
absolutely,
we can't fix all of these problems in this estate now. We've got to find a track that holds this problem in a holding pattern for the next decade until we get round to regeneration of this estate. What does that look like? And ironically, it looked like decent control of heating, data acquisition, and decent ventilation. Put a lot of those buildings into a state where you could say, well, look, we manage most of it, and if there are still some problems, we may have to put extra resources in, but it gets us into a position where we at least got some visibility and we can manage risk.
And that's exactly it. This is an assurance piece.
Yeah.
Like, how do we know that we're delivering a great service? And we all want to deliver a great service, and we're all behind delivering a great service, and we're all behind delivering a great service with a finite budget. And that's why that the data is the ultimate assurance piece here.
Yeah. The listeners to this podcast, Tom, aren't just from the UK; they're from Ireland and all over the world. If people want to come in and have a look at the kind of stuff that you're up to, what's the best place for them to go, or the kind of people to reach out to? Because I imagine there'll be quite a bit of interest in both what Switchee is doing at a housing level, but this approach to using IoT and data in the built environment and the kind of lessons you've learned. What's the best place for them to go?
On a first level, I think hopefully our website's great and gives a good indication of all of the case studies and the work that we've done. There's a program of webinars and events that people are both welcome to join, either here in the UK or globally. Please join our socials. We put out a lot of content there in terms of the stuff that we're working on. We do have I think we're going to do 2 big Switchee summits. Maybe I've announced that too early, but we're going to be doing 2 of the Switchee summits in the next 12 months. That's a great opportunity for just sort of thought leaders and collaborators to come together on this journey. So please do get yourself signed up for our socials, get yourself signed up for our main letter. And if there's a bit of the gap or particular something you want to know about, please do drop me an email, tom.robbins@switchee.com.
Well, listen, Tom, thanks so much for your time. It's been brilliant chatting to you. We've managed to eat into an hour and a half without even blinking, as I expected.
I knew we would.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me along on the platform. It's we really appreciate your support, really from day one, Simon. We very much see you as a thought leader in the space. So delighted to be here.
Brilliant, Tom. Thanks a million.